Okay, today we're going to talk about the paths table. Now, this is a very powerful feature that we have in Minion Backup, and I think you're going to like the way we put this together for you because it gives you so much flexibility in your scenarios, and it's actually really easy to configure. There are just a couple tricks you have to learn, and once you learn them, then you're off and running. So let's take a look at it. We're in our bit database, and that stands for Backup Install Test. And this is a fresh install of Minion Backup. I have done nothing else with it. And you see it comes with one row already called Minion Default for the database name. Now, for those of you that are on Minion Reindex, you're already used to what this default row does. But for those of you that aren't, this is the row that catches everything else that doesn't get caught, that you don't have something specified for. So this is if you want to back up all of your databases to the same location and have all of the same settings for all of them because it's a really small server, then you don't have to go anywhere else. All you have to do is specify the backup drive and the backup path and then the retention hours, and you're golden. But let's walk through a few of these. So database name, clearly it's the name of the database you're interested in. Whether or not this is a mirrored path, we'll talk about that in a minute, and we'll talk about it more in the mirroring video. The type of backup, the settings here are going to be all, full, log, or diff, right? The backup location type, that goes with this backup drive right here. So I'm backing up to C because this is just on a laptop, so it's going to be a local location. If I were backing up to a NAS, say if I were going to go to whack, I need another whack there, it didn't pick it up, there we go, NAS 1, like that, then I would change this to NAS. If I were backing up to Azure, so the backup drive would be HTTP, my PS, there we go, colon, whack, and then whatever my Azure location is, right, then I would put Azure in here. Or no, I'm sorry, I would put URL. Backup type would be URL. So that would make the backup type URL, just like that. There we go. Okay. And let me change this back to local. Change this back to C:\/ and get back where I started. Okay. So there's a difference between the drive and the path. So you can see here, if I'm backing up to a local drive, then I just want to put C:\/ and then the folder structure under here. Now, Minion Backup will automatically add the server name to the path, and if it's an instance, then it'll add the server name and the instance name. So each instance, if you have 5 instances on a server, then they'll all have their own paths, but they'll all be under the server name, which will all be under this path right here. And I might add also that both of these have to end with a \. So whatever you put in here, the last thing has to be a \. Now, server label, remember that I just said that Minion Backup will append the server name to this path. Well, this allows you to specify your own custom server label. So say if you don't want it to be the server name, if you want it to be the application name or the name of the cluster or something like that, then you can do that. And you can see this would come in very handy with availability groups or even some mirroring scenarios, right, where the server names will be different. Retention hours, of course, is the number of hours that you want to retain the backup file on disk. You notice that each one of these drives, and this is where the power comes in, you're going to see that here in a couple minutes, where the power comes in here, where you can set up different retention hours for each individual drive. Be on the lookout for that here in a couple minutes. File action method. The file actions are the actions that are performed after the backup on the files. So in this case, it would be either copy or move. So Minion Backup can copy or move files for you. And the method here is the method that you want to use to do the copy, because we allow you to use a regular move or copy method. We allow you to use robocopy or xcopy, right? Different utilities. So since there are different utilities there, then we allow you to specify the utility you want. If you don't choose anything, then we'll choose it for you. And then, of course, the flags here, a lot of those utilities come with a myriad of flags that you can use to get the functionality that you want. And so we allow you to pass in extra flags if you like. We're going to talk about that more when we get to the file action section, when we get to the file action video. path order. This is the order that you want the paths to be processed for things like copy operations or even for striping. We're not going to talk about that a lot right now. We've got other videos that are going to go more into depth than that. Now, is active, this is very important. It will not process this row unless that row is active. And the reason for that is mainly for DR scenarios or specialized backup scenarios for different days. So let's say that you have a different backup path or a different backup location in your DR site than you do on your main site, and you fail over to your DR site and backups kick in over there. Well, instead of completely redoing your entire structure here, you can keep two separate structures in this table. You notice how here it says Minion default do not remove, so I'm using the comments section. So what you could do is if you had 10 of these for your regular site and 5 of them for your DR site, the 5 for your DR site would be inactive, right? That would be is active equals false. But then when you fail over, you can just write an update statement or even a trigger that recognizes the site, right? Recognizes the box that it's on and switches the main paths off and then switches the DR paths back on and switches the DR paths on. And you can do that from the comment, right? You could say main site, main site, main site, and then DR site, DR site, DR site. And I'll flesh a couple of those out for you here by the end of the video. But just make sure that you have is active equals true. And I've even seen some scenarios where, you know, in the middle of the week, say on a Wednesday, for some reason, they had to back up to this drive instead of to this drive. And I don't remember why that was, but they alternated every now and then. So that would be something that you could do on your own, where instead of having to specify every single value in here, which is going to be accident prone, you can just keep those, and you know, you can have a pre-task, which we allow you to do, that goes in there, figures out what day it is, and turns the right ones on and turns the right ones off, so that, you know, it's much easier for you to change your configuration and not lose what you had before. So anyway, you've got the Minion default row, and this is set up for all backup types. But let's say you want to specialize. Let's say that you want to send one database's backups to a different drive instead. Let's go ahead and take a look first at what we've got. So I'm going to run Minion backup statement get. And this is a beautiful SP for testing your configuration. We've made this SP in a way that it's easy for you to test your configuration with it. Now, the only thing this thing does, you will never really use this SP for anything other than testing. But this SP is called by the main procedure to build the statements. So a lot of the statement logic is in this SP, so it's an excellent place to test your configuration to make sure it's going to do what you think it's going to do. So you pass in the database name, the backup type, and the size of the database. We're going to talk about that more, not today, but we're going to talk about it in our thresholds video when we start talking about dynamic tuning. So for right now, we're just going to assume that this is 1 gig, and that is the measurement is in gigs. Let's go ahead and pass this in, and let's see what we get. Okay, great. So I've got one. Let's go ahead and paste this in here. I've got 1 row. Now, when you get the result set back from this, you will have 1 row for every single file. There we go, and you can see it's backing up to SQL backups. There's my box name, there's the database name, and then finally here's the file name. So you can see here are the paths that you specified, and then here is what Minion Backup put on top of it. You know what? Let's go ahead and do one more with this default config, and let's give it a server label instead. So instead we'll say, oh, Sean's location. Why not, right? There we go. And now let's see what we get when I call this. There we go. So you see here where it replaced BindyCon with Sean's location. So you can see that it allows you to have a custom server label. And if you were to bounce back and forth between AG nodes or from a log shipping primary to a secondary or a mirroring primary to a secondary, you can see how this would be a really good way to centralize where all your backups are going, so they're all getting the exact same path and you don't have to worry about which one you're on for the routine. Okay? Okay, so now let's go ahead and create a custom row. So there's an easy way to do that. Where I am here, I'm just going to copy that and then I'm going to paste it. There we go. So I've got all the values the same, and I'm going to say we're going to stick with Minion dev. It's not a mirror. This is not a mirror location. Let's go ahead and use all for now, and we're going to leave everything the same, except I'm going to change this back to null. No need to keep that. And then for SQL backups, let's do, I want to show you which path it's backing up to. So I'm going to say Minion dev all, which is where I'm going there. The retention hours, we're going to keep it 24, and everything else stays the same. And it is true that it is that the config is active. Okay, so now that we have this custom row or this exception row for Minion dev database for all of the backups, then we will not get any more settings out of here. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we get. Let's see my statement. There we go, and you can see that I'm getting it out of the Minion all right there. And you can even see the path breakdown in here too, right? You can see Minion dev all, and you can see the paths broken down in here as well. So see Minion dev all. Okay, so now I've got all of my backups on the entire server going to this location, except for the Minion dev database, which is now going to this location. But if I want the log backups to go somewhere else, so I want to make an exception and I want the log backups to go to a separated log file even, right? I can do that. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste that. And then for the backup type, I'll put log. And then we'll come here. And we'll leave everything else the same because you understand what those configs mean. That's not what we're talking about. So I've got my default row that everybody's going to go to, except Minion dev, which all of the backups are going to go to the Minion dev all location, except the log backups, which will now go to Minion dev log. So you can see each one of these is an exception. So let's go ahead and run that one. Okay, and you can see here that we're still going to the Minion dev all location for the full backups, but now let's switch it to a log, and we should get the new location. There you go, now we have Minion dev log. So you can see that even though, let's go back to the table, even though I have a default row for all the databases, these define the exceptions. Now, I'm going to tell you that once you're at the database level, you stay at the database level. That means that once I have an exception for a database, then it will never, ever, ever go back to the Minion default row, even if something doesn't exist for that database, which is why I started with all. So the best advice I can give you is, even if you have only one exception, or especially even if you only have one exception, so even if I have only one exception that I need, which is logs, and I still want the Minion dev fulls and the diffs to go to the same location of SQL backups, I have to either have duplicate rows for all of the backup types for Minion dev, or I have to have this catch-all in here. So here's what it has to look like. Assuming now, let me get rid of this row. There we go. Assuming now that this is the config I want all of the backups on the entire server to go to this location, except the log backups for Minion dev. And I want the log backups for Minion dev going here. I still have to have a row for all of the Minion dev backups, because remember, once you're at the database level, it never goes back to the default level. So in order to do this, I either have to have the row that we just had for all, so I'm going to copy this and I'll paste it in here again. So I either have to have all, which will catch everybody that the log doesn't, or I have to have one for each one of these rows. And I'll copy that again and copy and paste that, and then say, so in one way or another, all of the backup types for this database have to be represented. See, so I've got my default row that everybody's going to catch, and I've got log, full, and diff for my exception database. Or, like I just did a second ago, I'm going to get rid of this one again. Or I have an all, and in which case the fulls and diffs will go here, but the logs will pick up the exception and they will go to this different location. So this one would actually be there, right? Because I want this to go to the same location as that. So you see how that works. If I have my database, if I have any database exceptions, I either have to have an all row, or I have to name each one of the backup types for that database in order for everything to get caught. Because if I don't, it's not going to choose the right row. It might choose some of the column, it might default for some of the columns to the Minion default, but it's not going to be a complete backup, and you're going to be missing a lot of information. So there are a lot of settings that aren't going to get picked up. So the only way to ensure that you get 100% what you're looking for is to have that all row, or to name each one of the backup types for that database. Now this is where the comments can come in handy. Let's take a look at a DR scenario real quick, and we're going to be talking about the isActive flag right now. So let's say that let's simplify it and go back down to only one row, the default row. There we go. Now I'm going to copy this default row again, and I'm going to paste it in here. There we go. Now, this is going to be a completely different scenario. So let's say I want this one going to /SQL backups. Same server label, same retention period, but I want this one to be for the DR site. So the DR site right there. Now, I can't have two of these right now, right? I've got a C and a Z, and they're both active. So right now I'm going to set isActive equal to false for the DR site. And so this is the one that's active when I'm on the primary site. And then if I switch over to the DR site, you notice that now I can switch this one to false, and we would do this in code, right? And switch this one to true, and this is the one that would be picked up when you're at the DR site. So now it would be backing up to the proper location over there. And like I said, you can have a pre-task, a step before the job that comes in and uses some metric that you guys have. Maybe it's the server name that detects which site you're on, and then turns the ones off that need to be turned off, and turns the ones on that need to be turned on. And you can use that with the comments, right? So you can say, set isActive equals true where comment equals DR site, right? And then set it equal false where comment equals primary site, or Minion default do not remove, right? So you can do something like that, and you can easily flip those before each job. It'll check which site it's on, and it'll give you the proper location for that site, or for that day, depending. If you have to alternate days, then you can fire up that same thing, and you can have a whole bunch of them defined in here. So you could even do something like this. Let me copy this again, and let me just give a few of these here just as an example. Oops, I just copied that instead of pasting it, didn't I? Copy, paste, paste, paste. There we go. So we'll use all of these, and I'll refresh that. There we go. So I'm going to use all these, and notice how every single one of these are going to be the exact same. But on this day, I want to do k://, and on this one I want to be s://, and on this one I want to be q://. And let's say, let me pick my right row, and let's say then instead of this one is Wednesday, Saturday, and Monday, right? So on different days, you want these to be backed up to different locations. And the same thing, all you have to do is have a pre-task or a pre-step that goes in there and checks the day and then turns these ones off. So for right now, we're going to turn all of these off. There we go. And now we have the config we want. So you can see how easy it is to switch back and forth between these different configs. So that's the basics of the backup table. Now we're going to get into some more specific usage scenarios in some other videos, like when we do the mirroring and when we do the AG scenarios and when we start getting into file actions. We're going to talk about this some more, but those are the basics of how to configure basic backups with the settings path table, and that is right here, backup settings path. Okay, that's it.